Hey everybody, welcome back to Soul School, and this is one of my favorite albums that's on Chess Records with the Dells, and I started thinking about the Dells and how they, basically help to keep the doors of Chess Records in Chicago open. It's actually really, really kind of unbelievable when you start to think about the time period in which the Dells actually come from, because you got to remember, in Chicago at that time, the Impressions were actually kind of around even before Curtis had Curtom. I think it was in '68 or whenever he actually started it. The Impressions had been around for a very long time. You had Marshall and the Shy-Lights who had been around for a very long time. You had the CODs who did Michael the Lover, who were around Chicago at that time. You had Tyrone Davis, who was around Chicago on the Dakar record label and had been very, very consistent for a long time. You had Jerry Butler, who had been around. But one thing is for sure, when you start talking about the most consistent, the baddest of the stand-up groups of Chicago and of all time period, the Dells is one of the very first names that actually come up in the conversation. And I believe they finally got inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, if I remember this right, because every year I would sit up and I would watch the ceremony. Even when it was private, I would get tapes before the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ceremonies would become public. And I remember always wishing they were one of the groups that I thought, much like War, that should actually have gotten in. I believe that they actually finally did get in. I have to go back and research that, but I believe that they're actually Rock and Roll Hall of Famers. And when you start thinking about the tenors and the baritones and Chuck Barksdale and all the guys, it's just unbelievable when you start to think about what was actually in the city of Chicago at that time, because E. Rodney Jones was a DJ over at WVON. He had that dry kind of voice, and he would train Don Cornelius, and Sid McCoy was there, and Bad Joe Cobb at WVON and WBEE Radio, and the Regal Theater, and you had the Five Stair Steps who were around. You had the Jackson 5 that would start coming through a little bit later on, Minnie Riperton. You had, of course, Sam Cooke. You had all these just different people, all that energy that was actually really around Chicago. Ramsey Lewis at that time, Fontella Bass with the Rescue Me. Chicago was perhaps the baddest hotbed of all. You start thinking about Detroit and New York and what was going on in the Bay Area, but I don't know if anybody was any hotter than what was actually happening in Chicago. Yvette Stevens, Shaka Khan, Earth, Wind, and Fire, even though they would basically be based out of L.A., they actually started in Chicago, but the Dells were always around and always like that cornerstone of that city. And actually, before Charles Stepney would start producing Rotary Connection, and before he would start producing Earth, Wind, and Fire, the group that he was actually producing was the Dells. He was like the main, I believe it was the arranger, and it's just unbelievable. Like I said, I could just talk about the jams and the jams and the jams, and I'm spending a lot of time talking about this because Marvin Jr. is a cat that is so very, very important. When you hear songs by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes like I Miss You, Yesterday I Had the Blues, Bad Luck, Hope That We Could Be Together Soon, you keep Marvin Jr. in the back of your thoughts because he's the father of that Teddy Pendergrass sound. When you watch that movie, The Five Heartbeats, a house is not a home, a house is not a house of love, whatever I forgot what they were singing because I'm drawing a blank, and I'm trying to convey and shake you guys and make you understand what the magnitude and the gravity of loss that this is. This is a big one. This is a big one. This is one, the likes of a Marvin Jr., we will never, ever see this again. And speaking on the Five Heartbeats, do you know that Robert Townsend went to the Wiltern Theater back in the day, and the Dells and the Delphonics had a show there? And Robert Townsend had an idea for this movie, which was a comedy about stand-up groups. And it was Marvin Junior, who just passed away, who checked Robert Townsend hard and said, hey, look, man, ain't nothing funny about sleeping in, slop houses, not being allowed to eat in certain restaurants, being jacked by promoters. Man, ain't nothing funny about that. I can't use the word over there, but he kind of checked him. And when he started kind of telling him, what that was, Robert Townsend said, you know what? What you're talking about is actually better than the idea that I actually had for the movie that I was going to do. And so Robert Townsend went out on the road with Marvin Jr. and the Dells and spent 6 weeks on a tour. And basically Marvin Jr. and the Dells basically told Robert Townsend all these stories, not just about the Dells, but stuff that would happen with the Temps and just different things. And then we get The 5 Heartbeats, which is a classic movie. And if Robert Townsend doesn't do nothing else in life, that movie I could watch over and over and over because of Eddie Kane Jr. and all this other stuff. But it was all, basically coming out of the head of the Dells and especially Marvin Jr. And so, when we start thinking about the weight and the gravity of this loss, I'm really trying to make you guys understand we just lost one of the real serious cornerstones of the whole thing. We really just did. I can go on and on and on and on because I'm kind of emotional about this because I understand. And I certainly hope that you guys are all starting to kind of get it a little bit. Let's get to some more entertainment on the one and only The Dells and celebrate the life of Marvin Jr. with a little bit more entertainment.